Hello and welcome back to the channel. Sorry it's been a very long time. As you can probably guess, I'm away with work and away from the van sadly. But now would be a great time to talk about really important, probably the most important part of a van build, and that is the design and planning stage. So planning, you're essentially going to be building a small house. So really you need to be putting as much planning in as you would building a house. You've got to think about things like the layout, plumbing, furniture, weight distribution, how much it's all going to cost, what order to build things in. Now I'm going to do a whole separate video on that because that's quite important. There's a lot to talk about. So I'd start off doing some research, look at other people's van builds, take some screenshots, look at people's different layouts. Don't be afraid to ask questions. People are normally quite happy to talk about their layout and help other people. I'd really recommend this book, The Van Conversion Bible, sold by Noma. It's many pages, and this really does go into every detail about building a van. I'll do a separate video on that, but I would highly recommend that. Also recommend a YouTube channel, a guy called Greg Virgo. He did a whole series from start to finish building out a Sprinter. I found that really helpful, and he did it in a really nice, easy to understand way. So what I found really helpful when I was designing my van was to go through my daily routine at home and think about how I'm going to replicate that in the van. What things am I going to compromise on? What things are non-negotiable? For example, a shower is a big one. Me personally, I can't live without a shower in the morning, so you've got to weigh that up, the costs of that, the weight of that. If you're going to use it, I mean, if you're staying at just campsites that have showers, maybe you don't need one. Things like cooking. How do you cook your meals? Do you have microwave meals? Do you want a whole stove and an oven? Again, what are the costs of that? What's the weight of that? You'll soon realise everything is a compromise and everything has pros and cons. So another example, sleeping arrangements. Do you want a big fixed bed, or are you going to have a small couch that turns into a sofa bed? Big bed, brilliant, nice and comfy, but takes up a lot of space. Sofa bed takes up less space, but do you want to have to make the bed every night and then put it all away in the morning? Up to you. And of course, with costs, are you going to be doing all the work yourself, or are you paying a professional company to fit it, or a bit of both? If you are paying a professional company, then really you need to go and talk to them as soon as possible, because any decent company that builds vans normally has their work booked out for months, if not longer, and often you might even have to pay a hefty deposit to even get a slot to fit in. And yeah, and it's good once you've sketched out your design to go and talk to the person that's building it, and they might tell you that's possible, you need to change that. Very good source of advice. First up, I would suggest going and buying a big notebook and some felt tip pens. Start off page 1. Make a list of things that you want to have in your van. You can make that list into things that are absolutely non-negotiable or things you might want. Write a list of pros and cons. Then work out the costs of how much all these things are going to be, and then that might help you make your decision. When it comes to costing, you've always got to add more than you think it is, because there'll always be something that you didn't think about, or something you have to change, or maybe even something that breaks. I don't know anyone that's ever built a van and it's actually come in on the budget they expected it to, so be aware of that. Then start making some sketches. Now these don't have to be technical drawings, they don't have to be to scale. You'll probably sketch it out a million times and change it, so don't worry too much about detail at this point. Just work out a rough location you're planning on putting things. Start off with the bed, because that's probably the biggest fixed item. And then if you're having a shower or a sink fitted, think about, is it a good idea? I would recommend having them close to each other or on the same side of the van, so you're not having to run water lines from one side of the van to the other. Now when it comes to furniture, you have a few options. If you have the skills to make your own furniture and cabinets, brilliant, but don't underestimate how difficult that is to actually do properly. Might be you have to pay someone else to do that. I did, because I knew I'd probably make a mess of it. You can buy pre-made furniture. Companies like EcoMotion, really good. They do some whole layouts actually. You can buy sort of flat pack pre-made. Some people have modified IKEA cabinets to fit, but what's most important when it comes to furniture is the weight. Don't be tempted to think, oh, I'll just use regular household furniture it's heavy. And when you're thinking about a van build, you have to consider the weight of everything, because it is your enemy. If you've only got a limit of 3.5 ton, including the van, you can very quickly find yourself over that limit. So if you're building your own furniture, you do need to be using lightweight furniture board. You also need to think about weight distribution, where you're going to put heavy items in your van. So the most heavy things like your water tank and your electrical system, I put mine over the rear wheels of my Sprinter because it's rear-wheel drive. It actually helps traction. And obviously the heaviest bit of the van is the engine in the front. That balances it out somewhat. You need to think about ventilation. I've done several videos on that. It's very important you have ventilation in your van, or you will get mold. Whether that's 1 max air fan or 2, especially if you have a bathroom, you definitely need some kind of ventilation in there. That's one of the most important things to stop mold in the van. You also need to think about insulation, what type of insulation you're going to use, whether you're going to use a vapor barrier or not. That's been argued to death all over the internet, so do your research and pick your side on that one. Think about windows and lighting. Again, pros and cons on windows. Obviously it's nice to be able to see outside and have natural lighting, but be aware windows are where the most amount of heat escapes through. Cooking and heating, are you going to use electrical things to cook with, like microwaves, air fryers? Are you going to have a gas hob? If you do have a gas hob, it's another expense, and you've got to add a gas system. You've got to think about the safety of that, gas locker. Or are you going to run a diesel heater, for example? Nice and simple, because you can run it off your diesel tank of the van. Now, electrical system. I've done quite a few very in-depth videos trying to explain the absolute basics of what you need for an electrical system. There's a lot to cover. I'd highly recommend going back and watching those. I'd also highly recommend a company called Noma. I'm still going to do a proper video on them at some point. But essentially, they are a company that you speak to, you tell them what kind of appliances and electrical needs you have for your van. They will help you design the whole system start to finish. They'll price match for you, and they'll supply everything you need to fit it, even the right gauge wiring and lugs to go on the end, heat shrink. Takes so much time and effort out of the equation. They also provide instructions and an engineer to talk to. I really can't recommend them enough, and they made it so simple for me to fit the electrics myself. But when you are sketching designs for your van, sketch out where the wiring is going to go, because wiring will need to go everywhere, through the ceiling. You might have to run some under the floor, behind the walls. You need to think about the best place to wire things, and also think about if you're going to need access to that in the future if something breaks, how easy it is to get to. So here's a sketch for when I was designing my van. As you can see, using felt pens, I sketched out where all the wires would have to go, both for the 12 volt systems and 230 volt. And also it helped me work out what length wiring I would need. I also did something similar for water lines. And as you can see, I chose to keep everything that uses water on one side of the van. So the water tank, the boiler, shower and sink. And that minimised the amount of pipe work versus having the sink, for example, on the other side of the van. I'd have needed to run a whole separate load of lines to it. And this was the final design I made for my van. Unlike the earlier sketches, I made this to scale. So I worked out the internal dimensions for the cargo area on the Sprinter, which was 420 centimetres by 180. I started off with the bed because I know that's a fixed dimension, so I put that in the back. And that way I then knew how much space I had left to work with, and that helped me make some rough estimates of what size everything should be, so the sofa, the shower area, etc. Now I would say these don't have to be millimetre perfect measurements, because when it comes to building it, obviously you're just going to cut things to size, but it does help you get an idea of what lengths of materials you need, especially things like boarding for the ceiling and walls. And I also made a few more sketches from different angles to get an idea of how everything was going to look. And many months later, pretty damn happy with the design. So I hope that's been helpful. As I said before, planning is definitely the most important stage of van building. I know it's very tempting. You've got your van, you just want to make it look nice, but that's the last step of the build, really. I am going to continue to make more videos on this topic. Unfortunately, like I said, I'm away at work, so might be a bit slower than usual. But please like and subscribe for more van content. Thank you.